focus. Ideate, innovate, enable. Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community.
Hello and welcome to Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me are leaders from various financial institutions who will be pooling their insights on powering a secure and resilient financial ecosystem. Indeed, in today's digitally transformed times with always-on customers, it is imperative for enterprises in the BFSI space to be agile and secure while weaving the DNA of data across their digital-first organizations to enable services that are available anywhere and anytime. So today, you will get an inside look at how companies have successfully leveraged the power of the financial community cloud while navigating compliance-driven financial workloads to not just survive, but thrive in this digital world. Without further delay, let me introduce to you our lineup of leaders, starting with Shrikant Mopidevi, MD and Head of Technology at DBS Bank. We also have with us Manoj Sarangi, Senior VP and CISO at NSDL, which is one of the largest securities depositories in the world. Joining us is also Prasanna Lohar, VP for Technology, covering digital innovation and architecture at DCB Bank, and providing the enablers perspective are Jaspal Singh Sani, Global CISO at Tata Communications, and Sridhar S., Vice President, Managed Services for Cloud, Hosting and Security at Tata Communications. Gentlemen, great to have you on board for this conversation. All right, let's first start by getting a quick perspective from our speakers on the key drivers for cloud adoption in the BFSI industry today and the cloud security consideration that comes along with it. Manoj, we'll start with you. You've believed in staying nimble and have viewed adoption of new ways of working as being easier. So tell us about the cloud journey at NSDL and how it was secured and made resilient.
So when you talk about cloud and the security in cloud, you do not dilute anything, any security norms when you move from on-premise to the cloud. So, for example, identity and access management, you follow the same norms that you follow in your on-premise, infrastructure. Then securing data is another thing, another area. So the data goes anywhere, the security stays with it. The policies, the processes that are associated with the data should stay with the data wherever it goes. If that is the principle on which you build your security, the data, irrespective of whether it is in cloud or on-premise, is considered having the same guidelines.
Prasanna, we have you with us as well. What are your thoughts on the key drivers for cloud adoption and cloud security consideration, since the banking industry is being disrupted in many ways, whether it's through rapid digitalization or integration with the fintech ecosystem? Your thoughts?
Cloud, in my view, cloud was always there since last more than 10 years for Indian banking ecosystem. What is that we have seen? Fintechs who are collaborating entities for banks to provide banking services to the larger community in tier 1 cities or tier 2 cities has given a lot of traction for building in-house cloud capabilities for banks. That's one thing. Another thing, the changing customer behavior. If you have seen, post-pandemic customer are looking for their services of banking, not only in banking platform, but also on non-banking platforms. Wherever they are going, traveling, they want to see those services available. So I think fintech collaborations and customer mindset changing and their hyper-personalized expectation from the banking services has really fueled things for a cloud adoption here onwards.
Absolutely. The consistency is the key when you weave security and data across your corporate fabric in the service of an always on customer. Being an always on enterprise needs you to be consistent. That's the message coming out. Jaspal, let me come to you from an enablement perspective. We've heard the depositories and banks give the use case perspective. Let me come to you for an enablement perspective, because you have a unique view of the digital transformation taking place in the BFSI space, having led information security both for banks and, of course, now with a major technology enabler. So according to you, what are some of the common myths and misconceptions around, say, cloud implementations, especially in terms of its security, that you have encountered in the industry? And what are some of the key areas that generally get overlooked?
So while there are specific nuances to the cloud adoption for the banks and the financial institutions, uh, there's also a lot of common facets which are often ignored. This is also a little bit like internal technology programs and transitions. And while the business objectives and IT outcomes are often on the forefront in the bold typeface, it's not always that the security objectives are considered and built into the commercial and operational considerations with the CSPs. In fact, what we have seen is that the static security processes of the past of the on-prem environments cannot keep pace with the changes and the agility within the cloud platforms. And the enterprises need a culture and a pace to integrate various security milestones right in line into the business outcomes and processes. So some of the key security areas which need to be considered while planning for a successful cloud transition, whether it's a new onboarding or it's a migration from the on-prem over to a new cloud model, are access control, security incident response monitoring, asset protection, asset classification, security assurance and testing, and security for the DevSecOps.
Meanwhile, Shrikant, let me get you into the discussion. Tell us, for any organization, how important is it to know their cloud provider's security foothold? Because as per the shared security model, is it not true that while a service provider can ensure the security of the infrastructure, the security of data, that still is the responsibility of the organization? So in your view, how does one secure the data in the cloud, the workloads, the applications? Your thoughts on this?
There are two broad dimensions to it. One is security of the cloud, and second is security in the cloud. And security in the cloud continues to be the responsibilities of the financial institute or the bank or the provider's consumer, if I may call it that. Right. So that responsibility, to Manoj's point earlier, is something that goes with the data, regardless of where the data is hosted or storage, and at the same time from a transit standpoint also. So we look at it from at least from a DBS standpoint, the way we started looking at it is the responsibility of security in the cloud resides with us, and we need to start looking at the different attack vectors the same way we would consider those factors if we were hosting this data on premises as well. To your question around how important it is for us to understand, while we have control over security in the cloud, security of the cloud is an equally important design element for us to be able to pick the right architecture pattern to be able to drive these two together.
Sridhar, let me get you in, from this on the cloud, off the cloud paradigm, for a sector that is so highly regulated, what's your view on these points from an enablement perspective?
The security of the cloud is where every cloud service provider will primarily provide their output. So for example, the physical layer, the infrastructure layer, and maybe the computing layer, the networking layer, and right up to the, let's say, the virtualization layer. But then when you get to the host instances, the network traffic management, traffic analysis, the application security, the right kind of security controls for the different aspects of that infrastructure, and then actively monitoring the incidents, because today there is a diverse presence there. And I think many of the applications are being directly consumed off the cloud today. So what happens is each and every one of these applications is going to start throwing some data at you. Now, how would you be able to put them all together? And how are you going to analyze them? How are you going to look at classifying all this into what is relevant information? How would you act on them? How would you put it in a manner in which you are able to react in the shortest possible time, reduce your mean time to response and your time to execute on that and recover from that? That becomes very, very important. And then comes, given the highly regulated nature of the industry, the compliance elements and data being the most critical element, the data at rest, data in motion, data in use, all of them become very, very important. And looking at where the data is resident, it's not going to be in any short time that the data will move permanently to the cloud. There will definitely be a sizable on-premises component of the core banking, of the critical customer data, etc.
Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community. Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community.
Shrikant, Manoj, let me bring you in for your reading of the cybersecurity directions issued earlier this year from the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERTIN, especially the 6-hour reporting time period and maintaining user data for 5 years.
I think it has become quite evident that this, the regulator is looking at it as a very, very important asset. And I would like to call it as an asset because there is a recognition that we need to protect an asset, number one. And number two, at the same time, it has become a lot more onerous in terms of compliance of ensuring that these things are, and then evidencing that these things are securing. Right. So those two dimensions adds a little bit of a complexity in terms of the right architecture pattern for us to fix, because the competing priorities in which we are operating is the time to market of an application, the time to market of launching a product or a service, while at the same time shifting left to the extent possible all of the security parameters, whether we are adopting DevSecOps or we are adopting any other design patterns around it. Shifting all of those left also puts a lot of stress around that. So what we are currently doing is to identify the right set of patterns that will enable us to not compromise on time to market, at the same time servicing to the customer, and at the same time ensuring we are dialing up on our security posture across the bank. Like you mentioned earlier, Gautam, we are called the safest bank in Asia for a reason. And the reason why we adopt these kinds of practices is not just about because a regulator or a new instrument has come in, but look at it more holistically to say, if there is an asset that needs to be protected, what will we go about in ensuring that it is protected? So there is a lot more holistic approach to that. Granted, there is a degree of evidencing that we'll have to do to make sure that it is staying protected and ensure that we have compliance and controls around that as well.
Absolutely. So that holistic approach to security is what enables you to go beyond the brief and think proactively about security. That's the banking perspective. Let me get in the depositories perspective. Manoj, your thoughts, your reading of these directions.
See, the background of these directions is something different. To have the user's confidence in the whole ecosystem. If you look at digital trust, by definition, it is the confidence of users in the ability of the ecosystem. So you have to build an ecosystem and maintain an ecosystem which is secure enough, and people can trust that ecosystem. And coming to the administrative part of reporting within a 6 hours period, it's something that I don't think I think it's a non-issue. I don't think that anyone should have a problem in reporting if they have an incident. They come to know within 6 hours. That should not be a problem. And keeping data is something that all transaction data. That is all organizations, all financial organizations keep the data for that much amount of time to make sure that the transaction that has happened in their ecosystem, their environment, is something that is traceable, auditable, and also can be traced back if there is a dispute at any point of time. So that's a non-issue. And I think these are the regulations. We should take them positive manner, and I don't think that's a major problem in that.
All right, it's the context that is important. Anything which is in the service of building a more resilient ecosystem works, even though there might be any short-term interruptions. Prasanna, let me bring you in at this point in time. The security risks being faced by an on-premises to cloud paradigm that entirely changes when the applications move to the cloud. So I want to know from you, what should be the strategy of an organization to manage the security risks while moving to the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very important for an organization who is quite stable, matured in all those guidelines and best practices to manage the security in a current managed data center. And all of a sudden, we decide, let's have some of those applications on the cloud. So primarily, apart from security, what organizations looks at, how do we move our applications on the cloud slowly, steadily as a strategy. Predominantly, if you talk about banking industry is concerned, how they are looking at, let's go ahead with some of those non-financial applications on the cloud. Let's assess all those areas. For example, having a right skill set within our organization to manage that the cloud, or understand how do we deploy it on the cloud. Followed by the security and the concerns. How do we do the VAPTs on how do we really understand the current architecture is getting changed into cloud-centric phenomena, like different type of databases, different types of apps on the cloud. To understand that through these non-financial deployments, kind of POCs or pilots, and slowly understand how we can create in-house COE or Center of Excellence structure or a governance structure which will help to onboard financial application on the cloud. Apart from that, how are you going to manage user management, data management? How do we take care of operations on those applications, or data security and personal security, and so on and so forth. Now, most important part in this journey is a application service provider. It's not a something which is a cloud application service provider, but application service provider who was giving me monolithic applications which were not ready for cloud. So how do you have the best practices here onwards? Any application I will build, it should be cloud ready. May not be deployed directly on cloud, but it should be cloud ready, so that tomorrow's if you have to deploy to cloud, it should be on the cloud. That is happening in-house development, as well as, say example, core banking or lending system which are not cloud ready today. So the traction or action for them also is that eventually they should be also ready for that cloud journey, so that today's our application is primarily predominantly for one bank, but tomorrow's applications are going to go for a customer experience across cloud or a multi-cloud kind of an environment. So I think while we are moving ahead, why it's not only bank's responsibility, but service provider, regulator, or a cloud service provider need to understand the complete 360 periphery and be ready for that customer who is willing to have one UPI or one account aggregator, which is a multi-bank or a multi-party effect.
Jasmal, let me bring you in. What's the thinking on this subject? How does Tata Communications address this issue? Because clearly customers are saying, no, don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk with us.
So I think this is the 9 yards of security, and but it's great to see such a naturally flowing convergence on thoughts and the areas which have been considered important, both from a provider standpoint as well as from the enterprises represented by our colleagues here, the depositories and the banks. But I think, yes, if you look at the 4 A's, of cloud identity management, authentication, authorization, account management, audit logging, these are definitely some of the vital sort of elements in building a secure security posture in the cloud sort of deployments. And it's often that these become the reason for majority of the incidents around data breaches, which we hear from time to time. In a cloud environment, each service has its own set of permissions, its own identity and personas, own APIs to maintain and enforce these business rules. This makes the configuration all the more difficult, and this also leaves room for errors which lead to the future exploits in some of the large sort of breaches which I mentioned earlier. This also makes it a very relevant and a timely reference to, like my other colleagues mentioned, implementation of zero trust architecture, authenticating more the request closer to the data sources, mandating the use of technologies like multi-factor authentication, especially for use of privileged accounts, changes and monitoring closely the changes to user access and usage behaviors, thereby flagging early the anomalies for a quick start and investigation into what possibly could become a security breach. Software supply chain attacks also make cloud service providers and the platform providers a lucrative target. From an adversary standpoint, they rather go for a large provider than go for individual singular organizations, causing a large scale disruption or breaching onto data sets of multiple customers, even leading on to other usual ransomware motivations what the adversaries have. So these are some of the thoughts which I believe are important and continually need to be assessed and managed.
And finally, Sridhar, how are community clouds helping BFSI customers overcome key concerns around security and compliance?
Community cloud as a platform is catching up, and one of the earliest was the government community cloud, which was under the auspices of MeitY, where they defined certain codifications, and it became easier from a decision-making point of view for government bodies to come and host on the platform. Likewise, this financial services community cloud is becoming important because one is at a larger level, it provides them the entire compliance framework as well as the regulatory requirement related answers in one particular frame itself. And for them to look at each and every element in an isolated manner is not is not easy today, and it is a drain on their time. So first is in terms of the framework. Second, I think Prasanna pointed out earlier, like for example, eKYC and many of the other fintech related applications have become very, very prevalent, particularly in the last 2 years, where we've moved more and more towards digital methods for authenticating customers, for customer KYC and stuff like that. So for applications such as that, creating a platform where you're able to get all the ISVs, relevant ISVs onto the single platform and enable our customers to pick up from this particular laundry list of applications that are already available makes it easier for them once again in shrinking their time to market. They're able to conceptualize something and they're able to launch it immediately. So the framework, the compliances, the set of ISVs, and we customize our deliverables to our customers in terms of the SLAs, etc., based on what this particular segment needs from a compliance point of view as well as from a data management point of view, which is very different from that of our traditional customers. So from an overall design point of view, end to end, this community cloud platform gives them a snug fit kind of a solution where they're able to cut out the time that it takes as well as the attention distraction that they would have in terms of looking at various elements in isolation. Instead, we give it to them as a composite where they're able to just pick up and run with it, and it shrinks their time to market. Back to you, Gautam.
Indeed, the platformization of everything, a blank canvas for enterprises to draw wonderful customer experiences and wonderful organizational experiences. Indeed, a brave new world coming up. But, well, we have completely run out of time. It's time to wrap up our conversation today, titled Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community. I'd like to thank all of our leaders who actively contributed to a better understanding of powering a secure and resilient financial ecosystem. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in and being part of a very engaging interactions. We loved your questions. Thank you so much for that. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.
Tata Communications and CNBC TV18 present Building India's Financial Cloud Community.
Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.